Hello and welcome to today's A Slice of Medieval. We have a real treat today, although I do think I say that every time, don't I?
You do say that every time, and it's always a real treat.
Yes, every single one of our guests is a real treat. But today we are joined all the way from Oakland, California, by Patricia Bracewell, who is the author of the Emma of Normandy trilogy, Shadow the Crown, The Price of Blood, and The Steel Beneath the Silk. Before embarking upon her writing career, Pat taught literature and composition, but it was her lifelong fascination with British history and a chance online reference to an unfamiliar English queen that led to years of research and to the penning of her novel series about the 11th century Queen of England, Emma of Normandy. She has spoken about Queen Emma to groups in America and Britain, and in 2024 she joined historians Alice Roberts and Nina Ramirez to discuss the Queen on BBC Radio 4's programme Great Lives. Oh, that must have been brilliant. She lives with her husband in Northern California. So welcome, Patricia Bracewell.
Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And I did mean to say in the introduction, and of course, Patricia and I, every time we actually did meet at the Historical Novel Society conference in September last year and spent a good few minutes sat chatting about Emma of Normandy. So
we did.
So what is your fascination with Emma?
Well, Emma was a very fascinating person. And as you mentioned in the introduction, I hadn't heard about her for most of my life. And then suddenly I bumped into her back in the 1990s. She is a little known Queen of England, even though she was on the throne of England as Queen Consort, Queen Dowager, Queen Mother, and even Queen in Exile for 50 years. And the first 15 or so of those years were very turbulent, and the last few years were very turbulent. The first 15 years, England was being invaded by the Vikings. Emma survived all of that. She was married to the Anglo-Saxon King of England first, and then she married his mortal enemy, the man who became the Danish King of England. And that in itself is what intrigued me. How did those marriages come about? How did she negotiate that? And then another thing about Emma is that she documented most of those years. She commissioned a book to be written about it, which we know as the Encomium Emma Regina. No one else was doing anything like that. So that was another part of my fascination with her. She was politically active, and she was historically important because she was politically active and she had a certain amount of agency. And I think because she was only the second woman to become Queen of all England, and she did it twice. I think she was trying to forge that role of queenship in England, and that was part of her goal as queen. How do we do this? How do we maneuver this? What is our role as queens? And finally, I think of Emma as the first wave of the Norman conquest. Because if it had not been for her two marriages and what resulted from them, the choices that this woman made, England would be very different today because the Norman conquest would never have happened. The only reason that William had a claim to the throne was because she was his great aunt. So she was pretty fascinating from the get-go.
I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, when William the Conqueror actually used his relationship with Emma as his reason for invasion.
Exactly. Yeah. So she was pretty important.
But she isn't or hasn't been very well known, has she? Because I never heard of her either until, relatively recently. And as you say, she was in a position of influence for a very long time, longer than most kings. Well, longer than near enough all the kings. So yeah, it is very interesting. So you mentioned that she was married twice, and you also hinted that she couldn't have picked two more different husbands. So what differences are there in her relationships with those two men, Ethelred of England and Canute?
Well, I think there were probably a lot of them. To begin with, her first marriage to Ethelred, she was quite young. She was probably in her
Mm,
teens. And he was twice her age, and he had been a king for 25 years. So he was sort of the strong man of that relationship. He had all the power. She
mm,
was this young girl coming over from Normandy. She was essentially a stranger in a strange land. The marriage was arranged by her brother, so she was essentially a pawn in this game, and she was sent to as part of an alliance to end the Viking invasions of England, which she did not end them. Um, and so that must have had an impact on her relationship with her husband. So that failure, what did that mean? But over the 15 years of her marriage, she gained in power. She got to know the aldermen, she got to know the bishops and the archbishops. And as Ethelred faded and aged and probably grew sick, she took on more power. And the fact that when they had to leave England, when Sven Forkbeard finally conquered England in 1013, where did they go? They went to Emma's family in
mm,
Normandy. So that raised her value. And now her son, Edward, is more important because of that relationship with Emma's brother, the Duke of Normandy. So she kind of grew into her role as queen and into her power as queen throughout that marriage, but it started small.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when she married Canute, by this time, she's already a queen. She's the wealthiest woman in England. So now we're looking at two people. He's a king, she's a queen. There's a level playing field. And if we're to believe Emma's encomium, she had a hand in negotiating that marriage. Now she's not the pawn on the game board, she's the queen. So that had an impact too. She knows the ropes. She's already a mover and a shaker, and she knows all the other people that are involved in those
mm,
roles in England, and she can really help. Now her Danishness, instead of being a disadvantage, which it was with Ethelred, is an advantage because her mother was Danish. She probably spoke Danish. Her great grandfather was Norse. So she had those Danish antecedents, and she and Canute could relate to each other because of that cultural background that they had. We see her drawn with him in that Liber Vitae of the New Minster, and they're both kind of on the same level.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this level playing field here. And certainly that's how Emma presents herself in her encomium. I think that she was not just a partner in rule, she was a counselor. The Danes expected their wives to give them advice. And I think that Emma gave Canute advice, and probably more than that, because he was gone from England a
yeah.
lot. So he needed strong people in place to rule in his absence. And if she was not the actual regent, I think she would have been a very close advisor to whoever the regent was, whether it was Godwin or Thorkel the Tall. So in terms of the political relationships, she was much stronger in the
Mm,
second marriage than she was in the first. In terms of the interpersonal relationship, that now we're talking about something that is really kind of based on rumor. With Ethelred, William of Malmesbury said that he was so offensive to her, he wouldn't even let her get in bed with him. Do we believe that? I don't know. I do. And that she was aware of her own dignity, and so she was offended by him. They only had 3 children, whereas with his first wife, Ethelred had 10.
Mm-hmm.
So, how much of that, the fewer children, had to do with their feelings for each other or the fact that he was just getting
mm,
old. Whereas with Canute, in the encomium, Emma has the encomium author say, they took a vast delight in each other. So we know that, and of course, he's younger than she is. Instead of marrying a man who is twice her age, she's marrying a man who's 5 or 6 years younger than
mm,
she is, and is this Viking warrior. So as opposed to, Ethelred has always kind of been presented to us as sort of King Rabbit. So I think she had a lot more fun with Canute.
Yeah. But she did only have 2 children with Canute,
Yes,
didn't she?
and that's the other thing that we don't, there's so many things that are not written. How many children did she have that didn't survive the birth? Were there miscarriages? We don't know. And if Canute was gone a lot too, he was not not there.
It's quite a contrast, though, isn't it? The 2 marriages.
It is.
As you say, there's probably an awful lot of differences. Between them.
It is, and it's great fun for a writer, for an author, to be able to write into those silences, those big gaps of what we don't know, and try to imagine what was that like. When I first read about her 2 marriages where her 2 husbands were enemies, I thought, how did she do that? How we look at that today and we think, oh my gosh, that must have been really difficult. And I'm sure it was.
But I suppose in those days, it was kind of expected that peace and alliances and so on would often be cemented by a royal marriage, or the marriage of the daughter of one person, not normally the wife of that person, but that kind of arrangement.
It did happen frequently, and marriage was a political arrangement in those days. And if there was a warmth in the marriage, if they took pleasure in each other, well, that was, icing on the cake.
Yeah, it was a bonus.
So, yeah.
But there was a rival, wasn't there, in the marriage with Canute? I mean, there was Elfgifu of Northampton.
Yes, Elfgifu. Yeah, she was the problem. She was the problem because she had 2 sons, and she was married to Canute before he met Emma, before he took the throne of England. And that's another thing that we just don't know. And we know that there was some sort of relationship that Canute had with her, because later on he sends her to Norway with one of their sons to rule in Norway. So it's not like he, done and dusted, put her in an abbey and she's gone. She was around, and she was in the north of England, and she had strong family connections. Really, she and Emma were 2 sides of the same coin. They were both good at making allies, and they both pushed for their children, their sons, to be king of England after Canute's death. There were a lot of similarities about them.
Which is probably what made them deadly enemies.
Yes, I'm sure they were. And I had great fun with Elfgifu in my novels. But we don't know what happened to her. She completely disappears after her son, Harold Harefoot, dies. We don't know what happened to her. We don't know where she's buried. We know what happened to Emma, and we know where she's buried. We can go see her bones in Winchester. So I'd say she won. She was, in my mind, she won.
Yes, so Emma had, what was it? She had 3 children with Ethelred, which was Edward, Alfred,
and Godiva.
Or Godgifu or Goda, and 2 children with Canute, which was half a Canute. Can always remember him because you just think Canute and then half a Canute. That's the way I've taught my son to remember it as well. And a daughter who was sent to marry was he emperor by then? At that point, emperor of Germany or something?
No, he was the son of Conrad II. So he was Henry, and he was the son of the Holy Roman Emperor. And she died.
That's it.
Gunhild was Emma and Canute's daughter. And she died of, believe it or not, a plague.
Yeah.
We went through COVID. She went through that. They were down in Italy, and there was something going on that went through the troops. And she wasn't the only one who died. I think Gisela, who was married to Conrad II, so she was a Holy Roman Empress, and she had been married twice before, and she had children of a previous marriage, and one of her sons from that marriage died from that same plague. So they lost two. And Gunhild would have been Emma's youngest. Yeah, and she lost her. She lost all but two of her children before she died.
From what I read, it always suggests that Arthur Canute was her favourite because she chose him for him to succeed his father Canute rather than fighting for Alfred and Edward. And I think Alfred and Edward, well, Edward certainly thought that she thought Arthur Canute was her favourite, didn't he?
Well, I don't know what he thought. And if he did think that, it must have, at one point, the two of them were ruling England together. So that must have been kind of dicey if he was really resentful about that. I don't know that.
I think it was more he was resentful to his mother, though,
Yes,
rather than his brother.
I agree. I think Emma was a political animal. And if you look at what was going on in England at the time, when Canute died, he had been on the throne for 18 years. Now, Ethelred and his sons were ancient history. But Ethelred was a loser. When they looked back at the laws, they looked at his father's laws, Edgar's laws. They didn't look at Ethelred because Ethelred he lost. He lost at Spain. He lost England. He made a lot of mistakes. And his sons have been gone. Does anybody even remember them? Emma was too canny to try to bring in two sons who nobody remembered and who would have no support over to England and try to take the reins of England. Meantime, we've got Elfgifu up in the north promoting her son, who was Scandinavian and English. So Emma is going to promote her son, who is Scandinavian and Norman English, because that's what he was. He spent the first 8 years of his life in England. His mother was Norman. His father was Danish. He'd been a king already in Denmark, so he knew what ruling was all about. He was the strong survivor. And the idea that, yes, he'd been gone from England for 9 years because he went over to Denmark when he was about 8. But he spent those first 8 years in the English court. And you remember that wonderful scene in 1023 that they talk about in the encomium where St. Alphaeus remains are moved from London to Canterbury. And it's a huge, big thing. Canute is only there for part of it. Who's involved? Emma and Harthacnut. And Harthacnut is presented as the son. You know, he's the heir. So he was the obvious claimant. It would have been nuts for her to try to bring Alfred and Edward over. Now, did she love him best? Was he her favorite? You know what I think? I think Gunhild was probably her favorite child because Gunhild was with her until she got married. Gunhild was 15 when she went over to Germany and married the Holy Roman Emperor. She would have been with her mother during all those 15 first years of her life. She would have been there with her when Canute died. She would have been there with her when Emma was struggling to get Harthacnut on the throne, struggling against Elfgifu. And we know that Gunhild knew about that because someone wrote a letter about that she was warning Harthacnut, you need to get over to England and help mom. So I think that probably if you're going to choose one who was her favorite, it was probably her youngest. It was probably Gunhild. That's my guess.
Yeah. One of the things that's charges that's leveled against her is that she wrote a letter to invite her son Alfred to England to take the crown from Harold Harefoot. Now, the upshot of that, spoiler alert, is that Alfred was killed eventually. Do you think she did invite him? She did write that letter? Or is that in the mists of time?
Well, it's certainly in the mists of time. But once again, Emma was a political animal. And I think she was way too smart to do something like that. I think that, you know, we think of here's England and here's Normandy and nothing happens between those two. Guess what? That's wrong.
Yeah.
I think people in England knew a lot about what was happening in Normandy and vice versa. And when Canute died, there are these two princes over in Normandy who are going, oh man, the bad guy's gone. And mom's sitting on a pile of money. And, you know, we have a claim to the throne. they've got friends, they've got supporters, they've got money. Let's go see what we can get. And over in England, Harthacnut and his mom are going, oh, those guys, they're going to come over. I know they're going to come over. I've heard rumors that they're getting an army together. I wonder when they're coming, and I wonder where they're going to land. And that was the question that was in that letter. When are you coming? And send word, where are you going to land? So I know. And I think that that was what they wanted to know. And sure enough, when Alfred landed, there was somebody there waiting for him. He had to land once, one place, and then he had to go another place because they knew where he was coming. So I'm in Emma's corner on that. And I'm probably one of the few people who say, she didn't write that. And it was in the encomium, he quoted it verbatim, whether it was the actual letter or whether something close to it. But Edward would have seen that letter because it was addressed to both of them. And there were people there who had been part of that. They knew what happened. So for her to say, for her to lie and say it wasn't me when it wasn't her, I think it wasn't her.
Yeah,
I think she was telling the truth.
I'm inclined to agree with you. It just sounds like such a, a plan from Harold Harefoot, lure Alfred and hopefully Edward over to England and, eliminate them.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, you know me, and if anyone who's read my books knows who I think probably was behind it. It was probably Elfgifu.
Yeah.
I think she was the moving force here. She was pretty devious.
Well, yes, and when you look at it, Harefoot already had the rival in Harthacnut. He didn't need the Norman rivals as well. If he could get rid of them, then so much the better. He didn't have a son and heir of his own yet. Spoiler alert, he never would, but he didn't know that at the time. And, it was just the chance to get rid of one or preferably two rivals to the throne.
Emma was a real thorn in his side. She was.
Yeah.
And like I say, she was a political animal. I think I just don't think she would do that.
I mean, it's interesting, the point you raise about there were other people around who would know. That happens so often in history. People nowadays say, oh, well, I think she was lying or he was lying or whatever. And often there would be people around at the time in, important positions who would know if somebody was lying about how things had happened.
Yeah.
So, we may not know exactly, but at the time, there would be people who would know. And we tend to forget that sometimes about these awkward situations.
And I think we forget about, they had spies.
Yeah.
They had spies. The Brits had spies in Normandy and in Denmark, and the Danes had spies in England and in Normandy. And, they knew what was going on in the courts, even though it was hard to, it took a long time for news to disseminate. It's not that far from London to Fécamp. You can do it in a day. So if the weather's right, that's the only thing really stopping you from getting message. And it's I think it would have been unlikely for Emma to be in communication with her sons while Canute was alive because she couldn't show favorites that way. She had to be the Queen of England, Canute's wife, Harthacnut's mother. Yeah. She could not do that. It would have thrown too much shade on her to do that. But that doesn't mean that there weren't other people communicating to her about them and to them about her and what was going on.
Yeah. It was the way to keep her son safe as well. We know Canute wasn't above what did he do with Edmund Ironside's two toddler sons? Sent them to the King of Sweden and ordered him to kill them. Luckily, the King of Sweden didn't and just sent them further on out of Canute's reach to Kiev. But she knew what Canute was capable of in order to protect his crown and the crowns of his sons in the future. So she had to have that distance from Alfred and Edward in order to keep them safe.
And that was just par for the course. I mean, it wasn't just Canute. Any king at that time would do that.
Yes.
It was very bloodthirsty. I mean, once you got
Yes.
the throne, you got rid of anybody that was in your way.
Yeah, it was a bit of a brutal era.
It was. It was.
So what was Emma trying to achieve in commissioning her own biography?
So I have a copy of the encomium. It's 25 pages long. Emma doesn't enter the story until page 15. So I'm not sure we can call it a biography. It was a political work. As I said, I'm going to say it again, she was a political animal. And again, once again, we have to look what was going on in England at the time that would inspire her to do this. It was written in 1042. Who's on the throne? Harthacnut and Edward are they're sort of co-ruling. Edward's come over from Normandy. The two of them are there. There must have been some conversation about, are we going to divide England between these two guys? One's going to take the north, one's going to take the south. And I think Emma was very much against that. And I think that was what was in the back of her mind when she commissioned this and when she was talking to the encomiast and telling him what to write. Because the story begins with the struggle for the throne. Who's going to own the throne? Is it going to be Sven? Is it going to be this other king who remains unnamed throughout the entire thing? She never mentions Ethelred. Why? Because nobody wants to talk about Ethelred by now.
Least of all Emma.
And then we have, and then we have Knut's struggle with Edmund, and England is divided into north and south. And oh, what? Guess what? God comes in and resolves this issue. And Edmund dies. And so now Canute is king of all England. And I think that was what was in her mind. It was the struggle for the throne. She wants to not see that kind of struggle again. We're going to have this little triangle of power at the end of the book where Emma's on top and her two sons are sort of coming in from the side. So the other thing that it does is and people say this, it clears up. She tries to clear up what happened with Alfred. And there must have been some talk at the time about how Alfred died, because you have Godwin, giving a ship to Harthacnut to say, I had to do what I did. It wasn't my fault. Because he was implicated in Alfred's death. And surely Emma was implicated. That's the whole thing about the letter. So she was trying to show what actually happened. And not just that, but over that whole period, this was the history of England as Emma wanted it remembered. And so I think that's why she had it done. Also, it's a ripping good story. You've got intrigue, you've got murder. I mean, this was Game of Thrones, 11th century. This was stuff to listen to around the fire in the court at night. I mean, this would have been really great stuff. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's so uncommon though, isn't it? I mean, is it unique? I mean, to have something that's commissioned by a woman that is about power, is about ruling, is about a country, as opposed to other matters which women were more naturally associated with at the time.
it is. It's very unusual. And of course, the only frustrating thing is that it doesn't talk enough about what Emma was doing. She doesn't focus on, okay, then I did this. And how did she spend her day? It doesn't talk about any of that. It talks about her relationships, and it talks about, that struggle for power. And of course, her daughter-in-law, Edith, would pick up on that. She would be the next one. That she wrote about her family.
Vita Edwardi.
Yeah, the Vitae Edwardi. So, and that was, she followed, I think, Emma's lead in that. But Emma was the first one to do something like that. She was pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is remarkable. Yeah.
And what's even more remarkable is that then she was forgotten. Not completely, because, there's a Tudor play called Edmund Ironside. And she's a figure in that Tudor play where she's sending her sons to Normandy. There's a wonderful scene where she sends them away, says, "No, come back, let me hold you again." And then she says, "No, come back, let me hold you again," and say goodbye. So certainly in Tudor times, she was perceived as a loving mother who was forced to give up her children.
I think the thing is also, though, wasn't it William of Malmesbury who told the story of her supposedly having an affair with a priest and having to walk on hot coals to prove her innocence? Yeah.
Plowshares. She had to walk on plowshares. I don't know. Was that William of Malmesbury? I think that was somebody else that was writing about the history of Winchester or
Yeah,
something.
I
It
can't
wasn't
remember
William,
who it was.
somebody else.
I usually blame William of Malmesbury, to be honest, because he does like to tell a story.
Well, yeah. I think of him as the first historical novelist.
Yes.
he's my first. If I can't remember who it is, then I'll blame him because it might well have been him. So I can't actually remember, but I know it was about 100 years after Emma died, so it wasn't like,
Yeah.
and you do wonder how much of it is, oh, let's pile on Queen Emma because she's not here to actually write another book and prove her innocence this time.
Well, in a way, it was to show her innocence. I mean, she proved her innocence in that. So it was a way of showing queenly. And basically, she got across those plowshares and went up to Edward and went, "Yeah, see there."
So let's think about her relationship with Edward. Did he hate her as such, or is that too strong, or how do you see the relationship between the two of them?
Well, certainly he hated Canute, and I think he hated that his mom married Canute. And we have to remember that Edward was 13 years old when Emma married Canute. And I think there's a little Oedipal stuff going on there, that whole love hate thing about mom. And she marries this hunky young Viking usurper. How could she? And she sent me away. What is wrong with her? I think he saw it as betrayal. And I think he was too young to recognize all the different strands that she was having to weave to just keep everything together. And then finally, he becomes king at 40. And by the way, he's king because of all her weaving. She's done it again. She was essentially the kingmaker when it came to her son. And she's expecting to do what she did for Harthacanute and what she did for Canute. She's going to be the advisor. She's the person with knowledge. She's the person with the language. She can help. And her son is 40 years old this time around. And he's saying, "Get out of my way, Mom. I don't need you." I have a 40-year-old son. I can understand that. And so we have that scene where he goes and he basically says that. He takes her the treasure and he says, "Stay in Winchester, don't come to court." And that lasts for what? How long? I don't know. Less than a year. They reconcile and she's back at court again. But she's learned that she needs to back off. I mean, I think she was involved in the decision for Edward to marry Godwin's daughter. I think she and Godwin probably hatched that between them, or maybe Githa was involved there too. So she's had to yield the reins of control to him, and then she finally goes to Winchester and says, "I'm done." So that's what I think about that. I think that Edward pisses me off.
He's not my favorite king.
No. Did he hate her? I don't think he hated her, but I think she was a thorn in his side, just like she was a thorn in Harold Harefoot's side. So
but I think he probably also realized that if it wasn't for her whispering in Harthacanute's ear, he wouldn't have been brought back to England to co-rule with Harthacanute. I'm sure that must have been Emma going to Harthacanute. You haven't got a son and heir. Bring your brother back and, reconcile.
Yeah, that's the political Emma at work again. We don't want to see another war. Come on. There's got to be a calm transfer of power again. And I hope you're right, Sharon. I hope he did recognize it. I always have the feeling he came back with kind of a chip on his shoulder.
Yeah.
But hopefully he did. I haven't written the scene. I haven't written that scene yet myself.
It might be that he either resented it because it had to be Mum arranging the reconciliation.
Yeah.
And of course, she'd abandoned him for however many years before that. So actually acknowledging that thanks to her, he becomes King of England is probably not on his top of his to-do list. You know, there's definitely a complicated relationship there.
Yes, I think so. And, you know, as he grew older and didn't have a child, you know, he must have become more and more aware of, oh, gosh, now I recognize what Mom must have gone through, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is quite difficult, isn't it, really?
Exactly.
This problem.
So, yeah, it's such an interesting history. It's such an interesting time.
It is. It's fascinating. There's so many strands.
Yeah.
So when's the mini series coming out? I mean, there's got to be a mini series in it.
Well, it's already out, you know. Vikings Valhalla has covered this period pretty well. And completely twisted everything.
Yes, what a surprise.
Oh my goodness, they collapsed time. They've got people the wrong age.
Yeah.
They forgot to kill off. They forgot to kill off Swain Forkbeard in the first series.
Oh, I know. He just kept going on and on. I was like, isn't he dead yet? There was a lovely tender scene when Knut died, though. I thought that was, I thought they did it great. That was lovely. But oh my God, they really twisted Emma. They made her into a horrible person.
And I like the scene where the Emma and Knut visited Edward and Alfred in Normandy, and Canute had a word with Edward about the way he was sullenly speaking to his mum. And it's like, you know, you don't know what she's done for you and what I could, and the undertone of what I could have done if it wasn't for your mum.
Yeah, I like that. Never happened.
No.
Never could have happened in a million years.
No.
But
it was an interesting way to explain the political situation for viewers who hadn't actually read the history and knew what was going on. So it was a great way to explain why Edward and Alfred were in Normandy.
So yes, the miniseries has already been done. They didn't ask for my input, unfortunately.
No, mine either.
I know. Don't you hate when that happens?
Yeah. Oh dear. I'd just be stood there going, no, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong.
It would take a very long time to film, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh dear. So Pat, what are you working on now?
Well, I think as I've hinted, for my sins, I'm working on another novel about Emma. And I'm looking at, it starts in about 1019. So she's married to Canute. The Steel Beneath the Silk ended with her marriage and her second crown, her marriage to Canute and her second crowning. And this picks up a couple of years later. And it will go, it's going to cover a long time. It goes from like 1019 until I think about 1045. And I'm struggling with it because it covers so much time.
Yeah.
And I'm going to skip about 7 years after Canute comes back from Rome. And I've been having fun with it. I've had to do a lot more research. Again, you know what it's like. You do all this research and then you focus in on a certain area and it's more research. And I've had to do a lot of research about Rome and about Germany, about Conrad II and Gisela. And so I'm working on that. And when it will be done, I don't know. It depends on how fast my brain works, which as I get older, it gets slower and slower. But I'm enjoying it.
Well, that's good.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
I can't wait. I know we had a discussion about it in September, so
We did.
I'm looking forward to reading the fruits of it eventually.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Pat. It's been an absolute delight. I've really had a good laugh and a really
Yeah.
enjoyable discussion. And so thank you very much. And look forward to chatting with you again once the book is done.
Yes.
Okay,
There's
thank
your
you.
impetus. Get the
Thank
book
you for
done.
having me. I so enjoyed it.
Good.
Really.
Good.
Thank you very much, Pat.
Thanks.
It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, thank you to Pat. Do join us next time when we will be joined by Helen Castor to talk about Henry IV. That's a great follow-on from the John of Gaunt episode we had a few weeks ago, isn't it? So we've actually got this timing right, chronological. Go.
They said it could never happen.
You'd think we planned these things, but we don't.
Yeah.
I've been Sharon Bennett Connolly.
And I'm Derek Birks. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast, it would be great if you could give us a review or a like. And we look forward to having you listen to the podcast again next time. Goodbye.